You are 23 years old, and you have just completed 7 years of medical study at the University of Montpellier, which is the finest medical school in Christendom, and you know almost nothing useful. This is not the university's fault exactly. You have read Galen. You have read Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, all 5 volumes, in a Latin translation that loses something in the rendering but remains formidable. You have studied the 4 humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, and the ways in which their imbalance produces disease, and you have learned to adjust them through bleeding, purging, dietary restriction, and the application of poultices whose ingredients you can recite from memory at speed. You can cast an astrological chart for a patient's prognosis. You can identify 37 herbs by sight and smell. None of this will help you very much with what is coming. But you don't know that yet. You are in Marseille in the autumn of 1347. You have taken a position with the city's administration, treating the poor in the lower quarters because it is the only position available to a young physician without connections or family money. The pay is modest, the patients are grateful and numerous, and mostly have things wrong with them that you can treat, or at least plausibly pretend to treat, which in medicine is not always a meaningful distinction. Then the Genoese ships come into harbor, and everything changes so fast that later, when you try to remember the sequence, the weeks compress into a single terrible image. The harbor, the ships, the bodies already visible on the decks. The harbor master orders them out. They don't leave fast enough. By then, it doesn't matter. The disease moves through the lower quarters in 2 weeks. You have seen pestilence before. Everyone has. Fevers come every summer. Children die of things that don't kill adults. Adults die of things that should not kill adults. Medicine in your century is a continuous negotiation with mortality, in which you win occasionally and lose often, and try to maintain the posture of a man who understands what is happening, even when you do not. This is different. The swellings appear first, hard, dark lumps in the groin and armpit and neck, some growing to the size of an apple within days. Then the blackening of the skin, which is where the names will come from later, the names that haven't been invented yet because the thing itself hasn't fully arrived yet. The speed of it. A man is well at dawn and delirious by noon, and dead by the following morning. You have not seen anything die that fast that was not already dying when you found it. You do what your training tells you to do. You bleed patients to correct the humoral imbalance. You apply poultices. You prescribe theriaca, the great compound antidote, 64 ingredients, trusted for 1,000 years. You pray because you are a man of your century, and prayer is part of the medical arsenal as surely as lancets and herbs. None of it works. None of it works on anyone. This is the fact that breaks something open in you, slowly, over the first weeks. Not the deaths, because you were trained to absorb deaths, but the perfect uniformity of your failure. The city contracts you specifically for plague work in early 1348. This happens because you are still alive, which by this point is credential enough. Most of the other physicians have left. This is not cowardice, or not only cowardice, it is also rational. The miasma theory, the dominant framework for understanding epidemic disease, holds that plague spreads through corrupted air. The logical response to corrupted air is to go somewhere with different air, and the physicians who can afford to do so generally do. You cannot afford to, so you stay. The city gives you a salary increase and a costume. The costume is not yet the famous one. That will be codified later in the next century when a French physician named Delorme designs the full ensemble that will become the image everyone carries. But the principle is already established. Waxed canvas robes to cover the skin, gloves, a hat, a mask. The mask has a beak stuffed with aromatic herbs and dried flowers and strongly scented substances, rose petals, camphor, cloves, juniper berries. The logic is that the pleasant smell will counteract the miasmatic corruption before it reaches you. The logic is wrong. But the mask, by enclosing your face and limiting contact, does something real. even if you do not know why. You put it on for the first time and you look at yourself in a piece of polished metal your landlady uses for a mirror. What looks back is not quite human. You decide this is appropriate. A day in the plague wards is a problem in triage that has no solution. There are more sick than you can see. There are more dead than the grave diggers can bury, which is why the city will eventually start digging the great pits, the fosses communes, and lowering bodies in by the cartload. You move through the wards with your list and your mask and your bag of instruments, and you make decisions so fast that they do not feel like decisions. They feel like reflex. This person has a chance. That one does not. This family should be sealed into their house. That one already has no one left to seal in. You lance the buboes when you can. This is the one intervention that seems to do something occasionally, draining the swelling, relieving pressure, allowing a small number of patients to survive who might not have otherwise. You do not know why it works when it works. You make a note. You lance the buboes and you move to the next bed. The smell inside the wards is the thing nobody warns you about adequately. You have the herbs in your beak. They are not enough. At the end of each day, you stand in a courtyard and a servant pours vinegar over your outer robes, which is the decontamination protocol. Vinegar is acidic. It does something. You live. Whether the vinegar is why you live is a question you will never be able to answer, and you are wise enough eventually to understand that you will never be able to answer it. By the summer of 1348, you have stopped counting the dead. Not because you are callous, or not only because you are callous, because some callousness is a medical necessity and you have made your peace with that, but because the numbers exceed anything your accounting has a framework for. The parish records will eventually suggest that Marseille loses something between a third and a half of its people in 12 months. At the time, there is no way to know this. At the time, there is only today's ward and tomorrow's ward, and the question of whether you will still be functional when you get there. You develop rituals. This is common among people who work inside catastrophe. Every morning before you dress, you eat the same breakfast: bread, an apple, watered wine, because the sameness is an anchor. You recite the Avicenna passages on epidemic disease, not because they are useful, but because the act of recitation reminds you that other men have faced terrible things and written them down, and that the writing down is itself a form of survival. You begin keeping your own notes, careful ones. What you observe, what you try, what happens. Not in the grand tradition of Galenic commentary, but simple records. This patient, these symptoms, this intervention, this outcome. It is a very small thing, and you have no idea what it means. You do it anyway because you are a physician who has run out of treatments, and recording what you cannot cure is the last professional dignity available to you. The plague does not end so much as it retreats. By 1349, the mortality slows. By 1350, Marseille is something like functional again. Quieter, emptier, with the particular raw energy of a place that has survived something it didn't expect to survive and isn't quite sure what to do with the survival. Businesses reopen. The market returns. People have children with a sort of ferocious urgency, as if replacing the absent. You are 26 years old. You look 40. You stay in the city, not because you planned to. You had a vague notion before everything of eventually establishing yourself somewhere more comfortable, but because by now you know Marseille's surviving population in the way that only a physician who has been to their bedsides knows a city. You know which families lost everyone and which, by apparent miracle, lost no one. You know the streets where the mortality was worst and the blocks that were strangely spared. You have theories about why. Your theories are mostly wrong, but the habit of forming them is the beginning of something you don't have a name for. Observation. Systematic observation. The idea that you might learn something from a disease not by consulting authorities, but by watching the disease itself. It is not a new idea. It will take another 300 years to become the dominant one. You marry at 31. Her name is Marguerite. She is a widow. Her husband was a draper who died in the first wave of the plague, leaving her with 2 children and a modest inheritance and an extremely clear view of what she requires from any future arrangement, which she states directly on the occasion of your 3rd meeting, which you find startling and then immediately sensible. She knows what you do. She has watched men in beaked masks move through her street. She understands the risks with the precision of someone who has already lost someone to the thing you walk into every day. She does not ask you to stop. What she asks is that you come home when you say you will, and that you eat properly, and that you tell her honestly when you are frightened, because a husband who is frightened and pretends otherwise is more dangerous in her experience than one who simply says so. You agree to these terms. You keep them mostly. The plague comes back. This is the thing the histories sometimes understate. It comes back. 1361, 1371, 1382. Each return is somewhat less catastrophic than the first. The survivors and their children have some partial resistance. The medical networks respond faster. The city seals its gates with more efficiency. But each return kills people. And the people it kills are real people with names and families and outstanding debts and unfinished arguments, and you attend every wave of them. You are 42 when the 1361 return takes Marguerite's youngest daughter, who is 17 and had recently become engaged to a baker's son from the Eastern Quarter. You stand at the bedside and you do what you can, and what you can is nothing, and you know it is nothing, and you do it anyway because that is what being there means. After, you go home and you sit in your study with your notes, and you read back through 14 years of careful observation, and you find, buried in the accumulated detail, things that are almost patterns. The densest mortality along the harbor. The correlation, not perfect, not remotely perfect, but present, between certain overcrowded streets and the spread. The families who kept their sick isolated and lost fewer members than those who gathered around the dying. These patterns do not tell you what the disease is or how it travels, but they tell you something moves it, something physical and local and, in principle, interruptible. You write this up. You send it to a physician you know in Avignon. He finds it interesting and somewhat heterodox and does nothing with it. You expected this. You send it anyway. In your 50s, you teach. The city's medical establishment is small and has been repeatedly depleted and is, by the 1360s, genuinely interested in training young physicians, because the alternative is to keep running short of them during emergencies. You lecture twice a week in a drafty hall near the harbor. You teach Galen because Galen is still what you teach, but you also teach what you saw. You teach your students to look at the patient before consulting the authority. You teach them to write down what happens, even when, especially when, what happens contradicts what the books predict. Some of them think you are eccentric. Some of them think you are the most useful teacher they have. The distinction maps almost perfectly onto which ones become good physicians. Your stepson, Luke, Marguerite's surviving child, who is now a grown man with a family of his own, asks you once whether you believe in what you do, whether, after everything, you believe medicine works. You think about this carefully. You tell him, "I believe some of it works, and the honest work of my lifetime has been trying to find out which parts. I have not finished. I will not finish, but the trying is not nothing." He nods. He is a sensible man. He understands that some answers are meant to take longer than one life. You are 61 when you write the document you consider your real work. Not the lecture notes, not the professional correspondence, not the formal treatises you produced in your 40s that were perfectly orthodox and therefore perfectly useless. This is a practical handbook, 40 pages. What a physician encounters during epidemic disease, what helps, what does not, and, crucially, what the physician does not know and should admit to not knowing. That last part is the radical section. Medicine in your century does not have a strong tradition of admitting uncertainty. Uncertainty is what the patient is paying you to resolve. An uncertain physician is a frightening physician, and a frightening physician loses patients to barber surgeons and charm merchants, and men who sell dried toads as amulets, which does the patients no good at all. But you have watched confident physicians kill people with confident treatments for 40 years, and you have decided that a clearly labeled uncertainty is less dangerous than a confidently offered lie. You write it down. You have it copied. You send it to 5 cities. It is read by perhaps 30 people in your lifetime. It will be rediscovered in a library in Lyon 150 years after you die, by a physician who will find in it several observations that strike him as remarkably contemporary. He will not know your name by then. Your name will not be on the copy. The copying clerk dropped a page and bound things back in the wrong order, and somewhere in the transcription your name detached itself from your work and was lost. This would have frustrated you. You also would have understood it. The work was never really about the name. You die at 67, which is old, and which you attribute variously, depending on your mood, to the vinegar, to the herbs in the mask, to the careful breakfasts, to fortune, to God, and to the deeply irrational conviction that you were not yet done observing. There is no ship burial. You are interred in the churchyard of the parish where you worked for 40 years, with a stone that gives your name and your dates, and the word physicus, which means physician, which means a man who studied nature, which is close enough. Marguerite's stone is next to yours. She went 8 years before you. Her stone is larger because Luke commissioned it, and he thought the size was proportionate to what she was owed. He was not wrong. Somewhere, future physicians are going to spend centuries arguing about what causes the plague. They will identify the bacterium in 1894. They will name it Yersinia pestis. They will trace the vector, the flea, the rat, the ship's hold, the harbor you stood outside in 1347 watching the Genoese vessels come in, and the tracing will be clean and complete and nothing like the fog you worked inside. They will know everything you didn't. They will not know what it was to put on the mask,